Hello. Welcome to the Malibu Music Room. Hey, well, I wonder who that could be. Why, it's Peter Asher and Jeffrey Allen Ross.
What a surprise.
Oh my
How are you?
God.
Nice to meet you. And good guitar.
Oh my God.
Hi, Coach.
And then too. Welcome to the Malibu Music Room. We have a very special guest today, Peter Asher. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi. Oh, it's a pleasure. We live about 5 minutes apart, so it couldn't be easier.
I know, but
Thank you.
so looking forward to speaking to you
My
for
pleasure.
such a long time. So many things. I mean, this could be a mini-series talking to you. There's so many different levels. Obviously, musician,
Yeah.
producer, manager, club owner, A&R. I mean, just like,
Yeah.
the list is endless. But
Well, thank you.
really, the impact. I mean, really, I'll get into this a little bit deeper. But really, your impact on really pop culture in both the British invasion and the California sound. You're really instrumental in both of those things, and I really can't think of anybody else who covers both bases like that. It's quite remarkable.
Well, I mean, maybe. Thank you. Yes. I mean, I was there, certainly. I don't know how instrumental I was. But yes.
You were vocal
was
as
there.
well as instrumental.
That's right.
But so I guess let's start at the top with your folks. Father, physician.
Yeah.
And actually very famous in psychiatry, someone who defined Munchausen
Yeah,
syndrome.
he sort of identified Munchausen syndrome and named it.
Yeah.
You know, doctors, when they identify diseases, usually name it after themselves.
A good one not to name after himself.
Well, exactly. But you still get people who go, who was Dr. Munchausen?
Yeah, right.
They don't understand that he named it after the symptom of the disease,
Right.
which is, of course, making up elaborate stories,
Right.
which is what Baron Munchausen did.
Right. Quite amazing. And your mother, of course.
Was a professional musician.
Yeah, and
Classical.
professor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you very early on, you know, I look back at your history, it's almost like you were part of that vortex, that Beatle vortex that was like forming in the ether even before you met Paul McCartney. I mean, I look back and your mother was a professor for George Martin.
She taught George Martin the oboe by a strange coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time she did meet George properly later on, at that time, of course, she met him as her daughter's boyfriend's record producer at the time. And they already knew each other, you know. Oh, it's Margaret Ellie too, taught me, you know.
Unbelievable.
That being her maiden name and her professional name.
And of course, your association with getting into acting, and you were on Robin Hood.
Yes.
Which, of course, Dick James
sang the song.
sang the song for
Robin Hood, Robin Hood, riding through the
Right.
Glen. That was it, yes.
Feared by the bad, loved by the good. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, I actually know the second verse, but that's for another.
Wow,
That's for a long lunch
that's
some
very
other,
good,
some
yeah.
other time. I mean, just the George Martin, Dick James. I mean, you're already kind of.
Well, I suppose unconsciously, yes. I mean, we
just like-
didn't know any of that at the time.
Of course, it's just the planets were starting to align.
And the funny part is, though, that of course, you know, because my name is associated with the Beatles to some degree, and because I have this radio show on their channel and so on, people think I'm some kind of all-in Beatles expert, and I'm not at all. There's people who know much more than me. And in particular, people go, oh, I'm going to Liverpool, you know, where should I go? And I go, I've hardly ever been there. I mean, Gordon and I did a couple of gigs there back in the day, and I've been there twice, maybe since, for a day or two. I don't know Liverpool at all, but people somehow assume that I do. But my only involvement with the Beatles, of course, began after they moved down to London. Liverpool had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, you know much more about the Beatles that people don't know. Is that's
Well,
the other aspect of it.
Yes, it's true that I was there, but then when I get all these, emails, which I love to read, and I love my audience on the radio show, but when they go, well, which guitar was George playing on this lick of this song? I have no idea.
Sure.
And not only that, I'm sure George would have no idea either.
Of course. What's the reference number?
It's only in retrospect that people get sufficiently nerdy to really get into all those details. Usually the bands themselves are the last people to know that kind of stuff. Yeah. But it's nice that people do research it and do find out. But people ask me like I would know. And number one, the only sessions I might know about are the ones where I was there. And even then, I probably wouldn't remember.
Right. Well, it really has become modern mythology in a way.
Exactly.
Too,
Well, exactly. But it's interesting that people like Mark Lewis, who I have amazing admiration for, do figure out all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a photo of me in the studio with George Martin and John Lennon and George listening to a playback.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing being we're all grouped around one speaker on one side of the room because it's a mono playback. But Mark was able to tell me what song we were listening to because he knew that it was the day that we were in one studio, they were in another, we went to visit. And from his charts and diagrams and detailed knowledge, he knew which song we were listening to. I had no idea.
Well, I'm amazed.
And I've forgotten already which one it was.
Right. Well, I'm amazed at the archival aspects of actually the British in general. I mean, I remember reading something when Giles Martin was remixing "I Am the Walrus," and they wanted to fly in that part from King Lear. Apparently, that was like live at the time.
I think it was on the radio or something.
It was on the radio,
yeah.
and they flew it. I mean, they just turned it on
yes,
the radio.
That's right.
And so they didn't really have it for some
Separated
reason.
on tape, they did not.
And he was able to go back. This is, I think, is in Mark's book. They actually would go back to the BBC and say, at 4:15 on Tuesday, the 5th of August, what were you playing? And they had that tape and had the exact.
Yes, that's it's particularly the BBC. I think which was a very formal organization. They kept really good records of everything. And EMI in its beginnings was very like that. They were very organized and rule bound, which had pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
And one of the pluses was they used to keep stuff. And then, of course, the tragedy is that attitude didn't necessarily expand to television because so many of the TV shows reused the tape, which was expensive.
Right.
And even radio did that too. I mean, of all the radio the Beatles did, I was reading something about this just the other day. Even though there are a lot of BBC stuff of the Beatles, which has mostly been released now, there's an awful lot they did that does not exist on tape.
Yeah.
The tapes got reused. I think Easy Beat, a couple of those shows that they did are gone.
Yeah.
Same in America with TV, of course. All kinds of great TV appearances. Shindig mostly disappeared.
Yeah.
Hullabaloo, most of it don't exist in black and white kinescope. Yeah. It's tragic.
The difference, though, I think mainly is that most of the stuff done in the United States was lip synced.
Well, but the reason I mentioned Shindig and Hullabaloo is that they weren't.
Right.
You're right. The lip sync stuff is really boring.
Yeah.
The shows that are interesting to see and that were interesting to do were the ones that were live. And the live shows were Ed Sullivan, Shindig, and Hullabaloo, pretty much.
Yeah.
I think that was kind of it. And because, Dick Clark and stuff was all lip sync. And when we've done one lip sync show, you've done them all.
Right.
And so, the live ones are really worth having. And we used to look forward to those shows because that's when we met other bands and got to hear them live too. Yeah. First time I met the Byrds was on Hullabaloo. First time I met the Supremes and Diana Ross, who I ended up working with a lot.
Do you love me, woman? If you need me, then believe me, I need you to be my woman.
Those live shows
This
were
is
great.
a little off topic, but I would like to get your opinion of this because my son is in a band now that's doing well. And, when they play with backing tracks. And it's because he says his audience expects it to sound like the record, like the recording. I shouldn't say record, whatever. Like the recording. In my day, our day, there was a live version of the song and there was a recorded version of the song.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point of having a live album, in my mind, to see what the artist thought was the essence of the song. I mean, I wanted to get your opinion on that.
The interesting thing is, of course, that it's no longer a black and white thing because it's not a question of are there tapes running or are there not. It's not that simple because now you can
Sure.
you can put a note on your keyboard and it can either be playing a keyboard sound, or he can be playing an entire
song,
verse of a song.
Right.
So it's not a fixed distinction. I tend to agree with you. Even in my show, and on a very minimal, clubby level that we do our shows on, we used to do Lady Godiva with the horns as a sample, a track, to a click track. Because I figured the horns were kind of the essence of the song, and that's what people would like to hear. But it feels better to sing, and turns out the audience like it better without that. So we've now binned all that. We don't do anything to click.
Yeah.
Except what we have to when I'm singing with Gordon live, because you have to. But there's nothing audio cued by click. And I tend to like that better. I mean, my daughter, as you probably know, was in a band for some years called Cobra Starship, and they did a bit of both. And they were all good players, and it actually, again, ended up being more exciting the times I saw them when they were not using tracks.
Yeah.
But when they were out promoting a brand new single, they would feel obliged, especially if they went on television, to have some of the program stuff in the track so that it sounded like the record.
Well, he feels in concert. That's what
so
the
in other
audience
words,
expects.
it's not a black and white. I don't think they necessarily do. I think audiences are coming around. Now, if you go and see Britney Spears, do you expect everything to be absolutely perfect?
Who can do calisthenics
because nothing
while
is
singing?
live.
Yeah,
right. And so, I mean, I think she's right to do what she does. And her show is programmed within an inch of its life.
Right.
And I mean, I talked to a guy who directed her TV show once, and he discovered that because it was identical every night, he could even run his shots off the SMPTE on all the stuff they were playing. You know, so when he'd do a shot of her doing this, you know, he would program it numerically rather than doing it himself. So he could just sit back because the show was so organized and fixed, which is not a bad thing. I mean, those shows are wildly entertaining and terrific. I have nothing against millions of costume changes and fancy lights and effects and all that stuff. But I also like to see a band live and playing their hearts out. You know, so it just depends on what the music is, you know, which is better. But I tend to think that people might be wrong in thinking that the audience will be disappointed or miserable or angry if they don't hear the record just the way they hear it on the radio. I think sometimes if the band's good, and Cobra Starship was good, and your son's band is probably good, I'm sure they are, and sometimes it can be a revelation. You know, the audience goes, actually, you know what? I like the song this way. We've discovered there's some song, you know, I do different kinds of shows from time to time. I do one that I do with Albert Lee.
I just saw it.
Just the two of us. So it's 2 acoustic guitars, and that's it. I play bass on a couple of songs, but that's it. And yet we do songs that I'm known for as having, you know, I Go to Pieces, for example. I do a whole other version with Albert. And which is the sort of slow, super sad acoustic version, and they like it, you know. And you might think that they would be upset not to hear all the drums and horns and strings, but they don't seem to be.
I will get back on track here, I promise.
Of course.
But I'm just having you here. I feel like there's so many other aspects I want to ask you about. One of the things was, you know, talking one time to Andrew Oldham, who produced the Rolling Stones and managed them. His theory was a rock band should not be more than 5 members. And I kind of have subscribed to that myself in the essence of when you get like 8 people on stage, to me it's more like a review than a band. And I'm wondering if you have a feeling on that.
No, I don't. I mean, I think that's very Andrew to have a rule like that.
Right. Well, of course, that's why
I think
Ian Stewart wasn't in the band.
Right. Well,
other things too. Yes.
Other things too. I loved Ian. He was a good player too as well. And I knew him, of course, because I used to go and see them back in the day when Ian was in the band.
Right.
Just around the time he started playing at the side of the stage.
Right.
But he was there
and with the short hair.
Yeah, he was there every night. And no, I don't think there's any rules. I mean, I'm trying to think of a great rock band with more than 5 people, but there must be one.
I think Manfred Mann had more than 5 people.
Definitely, yeah. Manfred Mann was an interesting band. A lot of great people.
Speaking of Manfred Mann, just to tie it around, I mean, one of the great, in my mind, Paul Jones to me is one of the great rock singers. All those Paul Rogers, Paul Jones. I mean,
Paul Jones is an amazing singer and one of the best harp players in the universe.
Really?
Oh, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that.
Oh, look on YouTube. There's some solo harmonica solos that he does by himself. He is the best in the world, I would say.
It's funny because I feel like people don't really know his name.
No, he still sings amazingly.
Yeah.
He still looks great.
Right.
And he, as I'm telling you, his harmonica playing is astounding.
Amazing. Because did you produce the Bee Gees song with him?
I did.
Yeah.
And The Sun
And
Will
the sun will
Shine.
shine. Right. Fantastic. So,
Which is mostly known now because I had a very cool rhythm section. It was the first record I ever produced.
really?
Yep. I owe Paul a debt because he asked me if I would do some solo recordings with him after he'd left the band. Because he'd watched me working on some Peter and Gordon records and liked my ideas. And he was the first person to because back then, I mean, now if you want to be a record producer, you can sit in your bedroom and open your laptop and produce and come up with something that will convince people that you should get the job.
Yeah.
Back then, you could not produce unless you were in a studio with musicians telling them what to do. And so I owe Paul a great debt for asking me to do that. And EMI therefore gave me the budget to do it.
Yeah.
And that's why the first session I ever did was this song for Paul Jones, 2 songs. And The Sun Will Shine and a B-side he wrote called And the Dog Presides. And I wanted to make sure I had a really good rhythm section, so I hired Nicky Hopkins on piano, Paul Samuel Smith from the Yardbirds on bass, who also, of course, went on to produce Carly Simon and Cat Stevens and was a very good friend of mine. And Jeff Beck on guitar and Paul McCartney on drums. Right. So I was taking no chances on having a competent rhythm section for the first date.
Amazing.
And they sound great. The record sounds really good.
Well, let me ask you that.
Wasn't there?
Because I was kind of going to get to that eventually anyway. Is how did you train? And those are to train to be a producer, or did you feel like you had to have the right engineer with you in order to feel comfortable being a producer, or what? How did that all happen for you?
Well, I learned to be a producer by watching other people producing our records.
Yeah.
And then eventually having the privilege of watching other people make records, including the Beatles occasionally. Yeah. But that was the only way to learn. And also, of course, I think you learn really how to be a producer by listening to records. I mean, I would spend hours listening to all my favorite records, which were all American. Going, my God, how did they get that bass sound? What is that? Drums? What are those? Yeah. My God, the tambourine's incredibly loud on all these Motown records, but it sounds great. And all that stuff, I did spend a lot of time listening to records, trying to figure out who was playing what, and why it sounded good. And I just liked the idea of it, listening to a song and figuring out how to arrange it and how to produce it. And I still love doing that. And certainly making all those records as an artist, working with John Burgess, who was an excellent producer, and Norman Newell, our very first producer, who did Well Without Love, and actually was less of a contributor than John was later. But maybe that was the right thing to do, I've always said, to my mind, being a producer doesn't always have to be ultra proactive. Sometimes some producers don't do much, and that's exactly right. David Crosby produced Joni Mitchell's very first album. Yeah. He mostly sat outside the studio, smoking a joint, stopping the record company interfering. Right. That was the right thing to do. Right. He stopped them putting strings on it. He stopped them turning it into Judy Collins Mark II. Right. And Joni knew exactly what she was doing and made her record. That was brilliant. Yeah. So, and the other thing a producer does that I think is so important is knowing when to stop. And by that I mean knowing when to stop working on a particular song because it's just not working. Maybe it's the song's fault. Knowing when you've done enough takes and you're wasting time if you've done another 50 takes. Knowing when to stop overdubbing when, the artist keeps going, well, maybe I should put another background part on here, or maybe I should, let me try that vocal one more time.
Make it end Michelangelo.
Sometimes it's like, no, we've got this one, it's great, you're done. And so on. Knowing when to stop mixing, because you can go nuts mixing, for days, and knowing when to stop trying to get the great snare drum sound because you passed it a few hours ago. All these things that are very familiar to you. Yeah. All the things that I think are important things for a producer to keep in mind.
On World Without Love, Dave Dexter is listed as a producer.
Yeah.
Did he? I mean,
nothing. I think what they did was create the horrible, bogus stereo mix in America, things like that. Right. But no, I think we did meet him eventually, but
because he was, you might say, talk a little bit about it. He was kind of the anathema of the Beatles. It tried to keep them out of the United States. And it just seemed very odd for him to be on your record.
Yeah, he exactly. he was the guy who somehow put together the American version or something. But it was the same.
But he was the one who
if
refused
they did
to
anything,
release them.
What?
My understanding is he was the one at Capitol who refused to release the Beatles in the United States
Could be.
initially.
That could be. Yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of people involved in that discussion, but it might be. And it was Alan Livingston, I guess, who I did like. He was a very smart guy. I remember him. People I remember at Capitol were him and a guy called Brown Meggs, who was great, who shows up in the books every now and then. He was really clever and good. And then eventually Stanley Gortikoff and some other people that got involved. But yeah, at the beginning, I think the whole of Capitol kind of was going, and then they caught up eventually, of course.
Yeah. Well, so back to the beginning, which I went off the rails here.
Okay.
Was with Peter and Gordon, meeting Gordon. So the two of you went to school together and just immediately hooked up together? Or?
I can't remember how immediately, but we quite rapidly became aware that we both played the guitar and sang.
Right.
And I don't quite remember the discussions about, trying to sing together, but we just got our guitars out and figured we knew the same chords. I think Gordon actually knew a few more chords than I did at that point. And, it was that era when someone would go, oh, you know about this one?
The famous B7th
exactly.
driving across town.
I think we both we passed that.
Right. That's in all the Beatles stories. They've taken a bus across town.
Right, yes, I remember. And, I think, had we met a couple more people, we might have been a band. Who knows?
Right.
But we didn't. And so, and to our surprise, we sounded good together. We enjoyed singing together.
It's great.
The weird part is that a lot of duos, their voices are somewhat similar. Don and Phil sound different, but not night and day. You could, for a second, you can imagine confusing which one was which.
Yeah.
Not with me and Gordon. If Gordon sings and I sing, it's a huge difference. He had this big, rich baritone, Elvis-y, manly voice, and I had this kind of wimpy choir boy, kind of, no vibrato.
It worked great.
It worked great. I know.
Because I mentioned to you earlier.
Oh no, I'm just saying we were surprised because because there was very little similarity, but together it did sound like not quite like either of us.
Yeah. I was mentioning earlier, my favorite Peter and Gordon song is "I Go to Pieces."
Yeah, that's a great song.
I'm a Del Shannon fan.
Love that song.
Anyway, but there was something just, I don't want to use the word magical, but whatever. It just seemed like the blend, everything just came together on that song. Like the first time I heard it, it's on my jukebox right now here, and I'm just wondering, when you recorded, did you go, wow, this is something really great?
Not necessarily different than its predecessors, no. We loved the song, but in terms of the blend, we were pretty happy with the ones before it. Was Well Without Love, Nobody I Know. I don't remember the order of the singles.
Right,
myself,
but there were Beatles songs, they were weren't the first singles Lennon McCartney songs?
Well Without Love was, Nobody I Know was. I don't know what was third. Was I Go to Pieces third? Maybe.
I think so.
Okay,
but in my recollection, it was the first non-Lennon McCartney song.
It probably was.
Yeah.
And then we went back to them when Paul wrote "I Don't Want to See You Again." I guess.
Woman,
and Woman, which he wrote under a pseudonym and all that stuff. And then the non-Beatle ones obviously were "I Go to Pieces" and "Lady Godiva" and "True Love Ways."
Yeah.
By the great Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
So we sort of divided it up, But obviously, if Paul would come to us and say, "I've written you guys a song," we would go, "Thank you very much," and record it.
It's funny, with True Love Ways, I'm a huge Buddy Holly fan.
Me too.
But I have to say that when True Love Ways first came out, I kind of felt it was too schmaltzy with the orchestra.
Yeah.
And I was really happy to hear your version of it because I felt it was like the way it should have been done.
You mean Buddy's was too schmaltzy? Because
Buddy's I thought was way too schmaltzy. It sounded like it was Lester Lannon Band or something.
Well, his was a bit schmaltzy. Ours was perhaps over dramatic, but because I had this idea, which I will take credit for, of making the bridge into a huge crescendo.
Yeah.
Which Buddy definitely did not do.
Yeah.
His bridge was just the same strength as the rest of it. But I had this feeling, given the chord structure of the bridge, that we could build it up and up, and make something of it. No, thank you. I like that record. I think we did a good record of it. And that was, the same actually with To Know You Is To Love You, or To Know Him Is To Love Him originally, of course. I liked our version of that too, and that was doing almost some of the same thing, but even more so. I mean, that bridge I just built up till it was about to explode.
Right.
It was me, weirdly, taking a Phil Spector song that he didn't produce in a Phil Spector way,
Right.
and then producing it as if Phil Spector, a few years later, in his Wall of Sound phase, had made it himself. I was copying his production
Right.
style on a song that was previously his.
Interesting. I knew he had been in the Teddy Bears, but I didn't know that he had actually produced that as well.
He did and wrote it, but of course the production was nothing like later Phil. It was,
right. Yeah, so it's really interesting to me. Were you using particular engineers that you liked at that time? Or?
I think we were using, my recollection is that you pretty much used who you were assigned.
Yeah.
It was very much a team thing at EMI then. I mean, even when you read now that Ron Richards filled in for George Martin on a couple of sessions,
Yeah.
producing something or other, I forget what.
Yeah.
And maybe Love Me Do even or something. But that seems odd now, the way producers think of themselves now. Back then it wasn't, So I have a feeling that when we showed up, we didn't necessarily know what engineer we were going to get. You'd got whoever was on duty,
Right.
was the flavor. And they were all good because they'd all been through this EMI training system, which was pretty rigorous.
Yeah.
You'd spend, a year snipping little clicks and pops out of classical records that were transferred to tape and things
Right.
like that. So you were highly trained and then you'd be a tape operator for a bit and finally you'd be an engineer. And you had to be able to make tea as well. And
Right.
so, but I don't think we always knew whether we were getting, Norman or Jeff or one of the other ones whose names
Right.
I don't remember at the moment. But so I don't remember going, have to get Jeff Emmerich, who was great.
Right.
But I think they were all pretty great.
Yeah.
And they all were very creative, but also they were all still bound by the rules. There was a sense in which, because as you probably know, when you requested a Fairchild or something,
Yeah.
it would be wheeled in by the men in white coats,
Yeah.
plugged in and set. That's, if you're putting a guitar through a Fairchild, that's the setting.
Right.
And it was a while before the Beatles got the power to kind of go, well, that's pretty good, but what happens if you do this?
Right.
And they go, oh, everything sucks and the cymbals sound crazy and you can't possibly do that. And they would go, that is exactly what's happening and it's super cool.
Well, but that's the
and they
beauty
got
of
away
guys
with it.
like Jeff Emmerich, because they were actually engineers. They could actually make the changes.
Yes, they could, but there was, you definitely
Rules, I know, yeah.
there were rules. There were definitely rules.
Yeah.
Mixing was definitely, the compressors were plugged in the mixing position,
Yeah.
which is why mixing was really fast, because you'd ended up with only 4 tracks, however many you'd bounce down to.
Right.
You still had 4 to mix, a couple of compressors on the overall mono output, or stereo occasionally later on. And that was it.
There was something, in a way, I'm a little nostalgic for it, in a way. Like, it's almost like there's too many choices.
Yes.
Now,
No, I agree.
I
don't miss any of that in the
Yeah.
sense that I'm not one of those people who misses tape at all.
Yeah.
Not in the slightest. And people now go, oh, you're so lucky you grew up in... No, you don't understand. Carrying these huge, heavy boxes everywhere you went,
Yeah.
if you went to another studio, hours of tones and azimuth and,
Right.
So I'm very happy to be done with it. Do I think one useful thing I learned from having done that is that sometimes you make decisions as you go along. Now I do run a lot into people going, well, keep all that, we'll decide later. I'm going,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
because if we decide now, we'll know what we're doing
Yeah.
at the next stage. If we keep everything and have a million pending decisions, then when we get the next guy in to overdub the violin or whatever, we won't know what he's supposed to play because we
Right.
won't know which vocal we've chosen or which drum fill we've chosen or whatever it is.
Right.
So I am a great proponent of making decisions as you go. And if some of them have to be irrevocable, not quite as irrevocable as it was when we had to mix everything down to one track
Yeah.
and be done with it. But I'm prepared to go, no, I like that take better. Keep that one,
Right.
Turn the other ones off. You don't have to delete them anymore, which is kind of reassuring. But at least, make it disappear. Do whatever you do on the keyboard to make it just go away.
Right.
And make decisions as we go.
Yeah. Well, it is a different time. I do want to talk a little bit. I obviously encourage everybody to see your live show where you really go into the Beatles aspects of things in more detail. And just for sake of completeness, I would like to talk a little bit about, your roommate, Paul McCartney time. How long did that last with Paul actually living in your house?
I think it was apparently about 2 years. I'm very bad at dates, but I'm told that it was about 2 years from when we moved in to moved out.
And I know you've had some crazy stories about having to devise escape routes for him.
Well, my father did actually. My father and Paul figured out a way across the roof to the house next door, and he could get out a different way when there were a big crowd of fans.
So, I mean, it was actually a point where there were fans knew that he was in your house.
Yes,
and
on the doorstep.
And was that a problem for your family?
Well, not really. I mean, there weren't big crowds of them. They were very amiable. There was a little crossover, I think, between my father, who was still seeing private patients at the house, when this started to happen. So that must have been a bit weird.
Well, for psychiatric patients becoming into a Beatlemania, women, girls,
they didn't know. Someone would arrive, somebody arrived for their appointment with the doctor, and there'd be a bunch of people milling about the doorstep, and they wouldn't know why. Right. We wouldn't say anything. So that was a bit odd.
Yeah. But I mean, you had that
it was odd for the neighbors.
Extraordinary experience of having, if I remember correctly, Lennon and McCartney being down in was your mother's studio in the basement or the first floor?
Well, there was a little music room in the basement.
Yeah.
Where she used to give private lessons occasionally.
Yeah.
And that had there were two pianos in the house, one upright down there.
Yeah.
And then the big grand in the first floor, second floor to you, first floor to us, right. Sitting room. And then eventually Paul did get a little upright, I think, in his room shortly before he moved out.
Yeah.
But yeah, they wrote I Want to Hold Your Hand and a few others in the basement piano.
You were basically the first.
I was the first person.
Writer of their songs.
Correct. Yes.
It's
correct.
quite an extraordinary situation. And so then.
Wish I'd written a few words of it myself.
No kidding. Yeah, if you'd only said, God, the bridge. Of course, you have that great story about the bridge in World Without Love.
Right. What?
You have that great story about the bridge in World Without Love.
Well, because Paul had written the rest of the song and then abandoned it.
Yeah.
And then by the time we asked if we could record it, and when it was still an orphan leftover song, which no one was going to record, he said, fine, but I did have to nag him to write the bridge. Mm-hmm. And finally, he took his guitar and went into his bedroom. This was upstairs, top floor we were on, and came out in about 5 minutes with the bridge. And people laugh when I tell the story as if the 5 minutes was an exaggeration, but of course it's not. Because we all know he knew the rest of the song. He finally was putting his mind to it. However songwriting works, which is a mystery to most of us.
Right.
So I wait, and in a while, you can write that in 5 minutes if you have the idea.
If you're in the trance.
If you're Paul McCartney.
Yeah, if you're in the zone.
Exactly.
Of doing that. So why
and who knows, maybe he thought of it before.
So why did he use a pseudonym for a woman?
It was being suggested, I think, by the press, and that maybe anything with their name on it or anything Beatle connected would automatically be successful.
Oh.
That it wasn't. Wasn't judged on its own quality. So he asked if we could use a pseudonym for a woman, and we settled on this name, Bernard Webb. And we concocted the story that he was a friend of Paul's from school or something who'd written this song, because we had to also explain why it was published by Northern Songs.
Right.
And it fell apart in about 3 or 4 weeks. But actually that was long enough for Paul to prove his point.
Yeah.
Because it was a hit straight away.
But I wonder if he split the songwriting with Lennon on that.
What?
I wonder if he split the songwriting with Lennon.
He did. So, it was Lennon McCartney. So he proved his point. It was a hit before it came out that he wrote it.
Amazing. So the next step here is you end up being in A&R in Apple.
Yes.
I mean, it just seems like it's like you fall into these situations, but you rise to suddenly become able to do it. I mean, when they said, would you like to be head of A&R, did you go like, how do you spell that? Or did you...
No. I mean, I do like the perception that I'm going to fall into things by accident. There's something very English about that. But in reality, it would be foolish to deny that I am an ambitious person who works hard. So there's both. Yeah. I mean, luck has played a considerable role in my career without doubt. But at the same time, I
you have to be willing to accept luck.
Well,
and work on it.
Yes, I mean, if it were all just luck, I'd be very unduly lucky.
Yeah.
It would be foolish to pretend, as I say, that I'm not at heart a deeply ambitious person. But I try to be ambitious in an amiable way.
Lovely. Well, I read that Richard DeLello books. Have you read that one, The Longest
Cocktail Party?
Yeah. And it sounded like total mayhem.
Yes. Well, of course, that was written from the perspective of Derek's office, which was a bit mayhemish. That's where Richard DeLello worked.
Right.
And the other floors, I was 4 floors about that, I guess, on the top floor, my office. And those were the floors where a lot did get done. And even Derek himself, as random as it all seemed, he was a genius, of course. and did work wonders for the Beatles and for everybody else.
And so, we'll have a little something explaining more about this. But basically, the Beatles put out ads for Apple saying, "Send us your tapes."
Well, yeah, the problem with being head of A&R for Apple, which, I mean, here's how it happened, first of all. Paul was aware of the producing I was doing and my ambitions as a producer. Indeed, as I mentioned to you, he played on the very first record I ever produced. I was involved in the production of some later Peter and Gordon records, including I Go to Pieces, but unofficially. We had a producer. I was merely being the interfering artist, but I was already had decided I wanted to be a producer. Yeah. Once I figured out what that role was, when I want to do that, and made it a career goal of mine. So Paul and I were talking about production, and he asked if I would produce some things for this new label they were planning. And I said, of course. And then in further discussions, he said, why don't you be head of A&R for the label? So whether I'd hinted at that or nudged him in any way, I don't remember, to be honest. But it certainly, it's not like it came out of the blue, Paul and I were sitting by this time at Cavendish Avenue, and he'd moved out. And I remember he had big diagrams of how Apple was going to work and his ideas for, which we'll get to, of, soliciting material and being willing to take outside material seriously. All of which we did. One of my jobs as head of A&R was this campaign where we did take ads saying, send us your tapes, we will not throw them in the bin. Mm-hmm. The tragedy is, of course, that we got nothing that was any good. Yeah. That of all the send-in material,
something in a box somewhere there.
It's sad. Yeah. We got some really awful stuff. And I mean, a huge amount of it, depressingly, one couldn't even take seriously. I mean, it would be people sending in a whole school exercise book full of poems that they wanted John Lennon to set to music, and they didn't even scan. It was it's not even like within the bounds of reason. Right. So unfortunately, there was a lot of that. I had a staff of people going through all the crap that we got sent. And it was a little bit depressing. We kept waiting for the gems, and they didn't appear.
And meanwhile, you can tell us. Meanwhile, James Taylor.
I found James
sleeping on your couch.
James Taylor came into my life through Danny Korchmar.
Yes.
Brilliant guitar player, fascinating guy. You should have him on your show.
Yeah. Flying Machine.
A great friend. And he was in a band called The Flying Machine with his childhood friend James Taylor. But before that, he'd been in a band that backed Peter and Gordon on the road. That's how we became friends. It was a band called the King Bees.
Yeah.
And in the 60s, we had done a couple of US tours accompanied by the King Bees, at least on the East Coast. And Danny and I became great friends and stayed in touch. So when the band broke up, he gave James my phone number in London, not knowing that I'd got this brand new job. It was unrelated. So James phoned me up out of the blue and said, I'm Danny's friend. He told me to give you a call. I invited him over and he played me these breathtaking songs.
Amazing.
And I went crazy in that. We had this bizarre conversation, which really was, as I recall, along the lines of, your stuff is amazing. I love your songs, love your singing, love your playing. I've just got this brand new job as head of A&R for a record label, and I can sign people. Would you like a record deal? And he said, why, yes, please. And I went, okay, done. And a couple of days later, brought him into the office to meet the owners of this record label, whom I had to explain to him, of course, who it was.
Yeah.
And there he was meeting the Beatles. And I didn't even think at the time how bizarre that must have been and how against the odds that must have seemed. Yeah. Because I'm sure America was full of kids jumping on a plane to London going, I'm going to go to London and meet the Beatles. Yeah. And James did, within days of arriving.
Unbelievable.
Or weeks, at least.
And of course, a little bit about the story with Something. Did James ever feel weird about that at all? Or?
I think I'll steer around that one.
Okay.
I think James. I don't know much about the story in the sense that we had that song called Something in the Way She Moves. Yeah. And then suddenly, a little later, George had a song out that used the same first line. Yeah. But James has pointed out, being fair, that he used in his song the phrase "I feel fine."
Right.
So
yeah, okay, we can stay around it.
fair enough.
It sounds
but
like, yeah.
but it's clearly. I mean,
Yeah.
George may well have been, that phrase may have stuck in his
Yeah,
head.
more importantly, in my mind.
But the great thing is, of course, somehow or other, it gave rise to two incredibly great songs.
Yeah, amazing.
Completely different songs, written by completely different people, and both wonderful.
Yeah.
So the end result is so good that it doesn't really matter what happened.
One thing I really wanted to ask you is about in that first album, the James Taylor album, which I really love. Was that your idea to put those intermezzos?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and who did you use, and how did you think of it? It was
Well, I used
fantastic.
Richard Houston was the guy. I wanted the arrangements. It's funny because Richard, in one of the things he wrote, Richard Houston said, "Oh, I think Peter used me because he didn't know any arrangers." Not true at all, of course, because I clearly knew arrangers because I knew Jeff Love. I knew all the people who'd arranged everything on all the Peter and Gordon records. So it wasn't that I didn't know any. It was that I didn't want to use a traditional pop arranger. Jeff Love was wonderful. He arranged all the orchestras on our tracks pretty much, and I would have used him. But I wanted to make them a bit more classical in nature. Richard Houston was a friend of mine, jazz trumpet player. I played in a jazz band with him, a very bad jazz band. And he also studied classical music at the Guildhall, I think, same place George Martin did. And was a classical composer. So that's why I asked him to write the arrangements for that album and write the interstitial stuff that went between the tracks. And that's how Richard Houston got affiliated with Apple. I recommended him to Paul, and he did the arrangements for Mary Hopkin for Those Were the Days and so on. And that's how he ended up writing the legendary Love 'Em or Hate 'Em arrangements for Long and Winding Road and that kind of thing.
Right.
You know, he became sort of the Apple.
It's such a great idea. I mean, what gave you that idea to do that?
Can't remember.
Yeah, it's such a great idea. And also, they're all different intermezzos, too. That's the other thing.
It was, I can tell you what motivated it. It was, and it's the same thing that, you know, I agree with people who sometimes describe that album as overproduced. I think they may be right. But that's why I decorated each song differently. String quartet here, brass quartet here, harps, you know, I put all this stuff on it and in between the songs. And that was in an attempt to make James stand out. I think my thinking at the time was he is not just another long-haired folk singer. Because at that time, the phrase singer-songwriter, by the way, didn't even exist.
Yeah.
If you had long hair and played an acoustic guitar, you were a folk singer. Even if you wrote every song you played, they weren't folk songs, you were a folk singer by definition. And I somehow wanted to say to people, no, he is more serious than that. He's more grown up than that. These songs are complicated. They're astoundingly well written. He's using jazz chords as well as folk chords. Listen, you know. And part of that campaign was putting arrangements on the songs.
Yeah, interesting. And James, of course, also is good enough. I mean, he's a fantastic guitarist. There's very few people you could watch a full 2-hour concert with them just playing the guitar and singing.
Right.
And the guitar accompaniment be interesting enough to watch.
Well, the whole thing was, you see, James, for a folk singer, was listening to Segovia and Julian Bream as well as Woody Guthrie, you know.
Yeah.
And then he was listening to Ray Charles and Sam Cooke, which is all, you hear that all that in the way he sings.
Yeah.
He was in his chords. He was listening to Manhattan's records and you know, so there's jazz, R&B flavored chords in there.
Yeah.
So it was the collection of all those influences that made James so
that little
remarkable.
What Child Is This? Greensleeves thing that he plays is very kind of Julian Bream, kind of jazzy, you know. I don't even know if that's...
Well, it's a little bit jazzy, a little bit Julian Bream classical.
Yeah.
It's exactly so.
Yeah, and he's playing that, I take it?
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So the next stage then becomes you guys, whatever happened so that you left Apple and decided to pack up.
Well, Alan Klein mostly.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the Beatles were arguing a lot anyway, and it might have got tricky, but it was Alan Klein that clinched it. I knew him by reputation from friends in New York.
Right.
I knew he was bad news. I was entirely on Paul's side in opposing him coming in.
Yeah.
He came in. James did have one meeting with him, didn't like him.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, I think we should just get the hell out of here.
And you were able, again, these things are so amazing to me. And again, I don't mean to sound like it's luck or whatever, but as you said, it's just the chutzpah and the ambition to just like say, okay, we're packing up, We're moving 6,000 miles away.
Right.
We're going to start again. It's like you got in a covered wagon and went west.
That's right.
And we're going to start here. And not only am I going to be your A&R guy and producer, I'm going to be your manager.
Yeah, we agreed on that because we couldn't think of anybody else we trusted to do it.
Yeah.
And my feeling was, how hard can it be? And
Yeah.
and I was right because, one of the annoying things I tend to say to people when people say, "How do you become a great manager?" Sadly, number one, of course, is have a great client.
Yeah.
It's pathetically simple. That when I got to induct the first two managers into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's no surprise that they were Brian Epstein, the Beatles, Andrew, the Stones.
Right.
So it's like, duh, that's how you become a great manager. You find the Beatles or the Stones, or in my case, James Taylor.
Yeah.
So I found the right people to learn off. People like Nat Weiss, who was my friend from Beatle days, who was a genius. And so I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I didn't know. I knew when to ask advice. But essentially, it did consist, just as Brian Epstein did, of going up to people and going, you have to listen to this guy. He's great. He's going to be a huge star. I don't think I used the phrase bigger than Elvis because Brian had already copyrighted that one.
Yeah.
But,
taller than Elvis.
right, exactly. But I was right. Brian was right, and I was right.
Yeah. So the next, sure, there's many things in between, but I want to move on. So I mean, like I said, this could be a mini series for me if somebody wants to ask you.
Right.
But so now we get into Linda Ronstadt, which is really interesting. I mean, Linda Ronstadt is the reason I'm in California, but that's a different story. Anyway, the point is, Linda Ronstadt is somebody, who I consider one of the great female singers, and she seems to be relatively unknown to the younger generation. As I was mentioning before, my son is a musician, and he's 31, and he is very well versed in all the British invasion and very influenced by all that, as well as other things. And I know Jackson Browne and Bonnie Raitt, people like that, but doesn't really know Linda Ronstadt.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested as to, do you have any idea why that is?
No. I still believe that Linda is underappreciated. You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I make no bones of the fact that Linda was the finest singer I ever got to work with in the studio. I've worked with tons of amazing singers, and I love all of them. But just for being able to open a mouth and completely blow you away with singing, Linda takes the cake.
You're talking about the live being like the recording.
Yeah. Boy, I mean, every night. And she remains a great friend. She's one of the cleverest women I know. She's brilliant and charming and amazing in every way. So the first time I heard her sing, which was at the Bitter End in New York, I was just so impressed. It was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. And that was it? You just decided to sign her at that point?
Yes, it was complicated. I'd had some discussions with her and with John Boylan around that time. John had been managing her and was stepping aside. And they were also in the middle of finishing an album, which was the Don't Cry Now album. So I think I first started working with Linda as a producer, trying to help her finish that record. Because she'd done some with John Boylan, some with John David Souther, both of whom were boyfriends at the time, which made life a little bit complicated. And she asked me to help finish it. And then when we got the album done, eventually, I think the first time we talked about management, I was not able to take it on because I just started managing Kate Taylor, James's sister, and I just made a record with her. And I thought that working on both might be tricky, to go around with two great girl singers going, she's the best singer you've ever had. It would be tricky. Right. But then eventually Kate decided that at that moment the music business was not for her. She kind of retired for a bit. And that I started working with Linda and did become her manager, yes.
It's amazing. And of course, the accolades, which we'll list on here. I mean, just going back in your career, do you ever have time to reflect on it at all and just go like, all the different things you just, being I just, to me, don't think this is ever going to be repeated again, this time in history. We're talking about modern mythology. And what's your feeling on that?
I don't spend much time reflecting, no.
Yeah.
I mean, my overall feeling is kind of so far so good,
Yeah.
And there's more to do.
Yeah.
I'm not quitting yet. I'm not.
Well, of course, you're very active.
Right.
And maybe we want to talk about that a bit.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, and I don't mean that in any weird way, but yeah, until I'm deaf or dead, I'm not planning to stop, So I still love music. I still get as excited about new artists as I ever did.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not one of those, they don't write songs like that anymore people. You know,
Yeah, of course.
I think there's so much great music out there now.
But it's, I've seen you in all the different, not all, I've seen you with solo, and I've seen you with Albert Lee, and I've seen you with Jeremy.
Yeah.
And, it just, to me, is the joy of still playing these songs.
Yes.
That is something that's, unfortunately, I find unusual.
I stopped doing any gigs for many years.
Yeah.
30-some years. When Gordon and I weren't working together, I didn't do anything. And it wasn't really till, I got back together with Gordon for that one benefit at the behest of Paul Schaefer, who was doing a benefit for Mike Smith from the Dave Clark 5.
Right.
And I kind of realized if we're ever going to do one, this should be it.
Yeah.
So, because, Schaefer called me up and said, please, will you do, I want to make it a British Invasion themed benefit.
Yeah.
What would it take to get you and Gordon back together after 37 years? And I said, well, this phone call is probably it. And we did. And then when Gordon died, and so Gordon and I did a number of shows around that time because it was fun. And then when Gordon died, that's when I had to decide, does that mean I never sing these songs again?
Yeah.
And that's when I had the idea of putting together some kind of a memoir show of reminiscences and storytelling and songs. And that's what we did. And then since then, other ideas have come my way, like the show with Albert, the show with Jeremy, since Chad retired and so on.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, I'd love to hear, also, I just want to mention your Sirius XM show. We'll put all this stuff on the...
Yeah, I have fun doing the radio show because I do find myself remembering other bits and pieces. Same as I do doing the memoir show. It changes a little every night. I do change the stories a little bit because I do remember other things. And occasionally people will actually be there and remind me of things.
Right.
But don't you remember we had lunch and did this and... Oh, right.
Fantastic.
So, because my memory is not terribly good and my memory for dates is abysmal. I'm one of those people who think something was last week and it was 5 years ago and vice versa.
Well, I think that's common as we're in our age group here.
Absolutely.
So, I very often say, that was 2 years ago, and it turns out to be 12 years ago.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we're lucky we can remember anything.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm very looking forward to seeing you enjoy singing a song, if you would, for us now.
Sure, by all means.
And thank you so much again.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, so much for inviting us. Thanks to the fabulously good-looking studio audience here. And let me introduce my musical director, Jeff Allen Ross. We're going to do a couple of songs for you, starting, as it were, at the beginning, the same way you started the excellent interview. Because we're going to start with the very first hit that Peter and Gordon ever had. This is the song that Paul McCartney famously wrote. It was an unfinished song, abandoned. Nobody was going to sing it. John didn't think it was up to much and didn't think it was right for the Beatles. I did prevail upon Paul to finish it and write the bridge when he finally got around to it, which was about a week before our session. We cut about 5 songs on that session. And by the end of it, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that World Without Love was going to be our first single. Came out a month later, went to number 1 in England, number 1 in Europe. Finally, to our utmost incredulity and delight, number 1 here in America. Changed my life forever. I owe this song a great debt of gratitude. World Without Love. 2, 3, 4. Please lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. Birds sing out of tune, and rain clouds hide the moon. I'm okay, here I'll stay with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. And the famous last-minute bridge. So I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when. When she does, I'll know. So baby, until then, lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what say I won't stay in a world without love. So I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when. When she does, I'll know. So baby, until then, lock me away, and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. Sorry, a few morning croaks in that one, but not too bad. Now we're going to do another song that was actually, I think, my favorite Peter and Gordon record. This is one that Del Shannon wrote. We were in Australia on tour with Del and another English band, The Searchers, great band. Del had written this song, didn't think it was right for himself, and he was actually offering it to The Searchers. They turned it down, we overheard it, we picked it up. I loved the song and said to Del, please don't give it to anybody else. When we get back to London, we will record it, and we think it can be a big hit. We did, and it was. So, in memory of the great Del Shannon, here's our version of I Go to Pieces. When I see her coming down the street, I get so shaky and I feel so weak. I tell my eyes, look the other way, but they don't seem to hear a word I say. And I go to pieces and I wanna hide. Go to pieces and I almost die every time my baby passes by. I tell my arms they'll hold someone new, another love that will be true. But they don't listen, they don't seem to care. They reach for her, but she's not there. And I go to pieces and I wanna hide. Go to pieces and I almost die every time my baby passes by. I remember what she said when she said goodbye. Baby, we'll meet again soon, maybe. But until we do, all my best to you. I'm so lonely, think about her only. I go to places we used to go, but I know she'll never show. She hurt me so much inside. Now I hope she's satisfied. And I go to pieces and I wanna hide. Go to pieces and I almost die every time my baby passes by. Go to pieces and I cry every time my baby passes by. Go to pieces and I cry every time my baby passes by. Thank you very much.
I want to thank my guest, Peter ASHER, as well as Jeffrey Allen Ross. Thank you so much for coming to the Malibu Music Room.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having us. It's been great.
That's fantastic. See you next time on the Malibu Music Room.